Hello my friends, welcome to Reddit Rabbit. Before we start, catch the rabbit at the bottom right corner, smash that subscribe button and leave a comment. Today I learned that initially the adults of Sesame Street didn't believe Mr.Snuffleupagus was real, but this was changed to avoid having kids feel that adults wouldn't believe them when they had something important to say. I remember that from the 80s. He was treated as Big Bird's imaginary friend. He would always waddle into frame when everyone leaves, waddle away when they arrived, and everyone asked, "Who are you talking to?" I fondly remember that too. I want to say there were multiple episodes of Big Bird attempting to get adults to see Snuffy, but kept failing. Really, they had such great little story series just like Mr. Rogers' Land of Make-Believe. Tuned in just to see the progress in the story. Yeah, Big Bird was insistent that Snuffy was real, but people kept telling him they didn't exist. The week he said Snuffy met the adults in 1985, but I was barely a year old then. I probably watched it between 1986 to 1989ish, and all my memories are of adults not believing in Snuffy. I know the early childhood memories of a 36-year might be inaccurate, but even if my memories are flawed, why would I remember Snuffy giving the adults the slip constantly? You probably saw a lot of reruns. As a new parent, I've watched a lot of Sesame Street lately, and until HBO bought it, it was more a clip show where they'd have a great deal of old material in each episode to stretch it out. Like, animations clearly from the 70s were airing in episodes from 2015. I'm with you 100%, so there has to be some truth to our distant memories. I watched it during the same years as you, about the same age, and I am pretty sure Snuffy was not believed by the adults the entire time. I didn't watch before 85. I remember it took a long time before they revealed him. I'm with you on that. I would have been 6 in 1985, and I actually remember the adults meeting Snuffy as a fairly momentous event that I was very aware of when it happened. Feels like I was older than 6 when it happened, but who knows. I had outgrown Sesame Street when Snuffy was finally seen, so I missed the episode where he was revealed to the others. But I clearly remember at some point in middle school flipping through channels and landing on Sesame Street and seeing Snuffy interacting with the cast and thinking to myself, oh my god, they finally believe Big Bird, and being so happy for Big Bird. Yeah, I was a child of the era of Snuffy not being real to adults. I remember just wanting an adult to see him to prove he was real. I remember feeling frustrated by the whole situation. Same here. The near misses frustrated my little child self. I feel like my mum had to tell me he was real. Me too. It used to drive me crazy. Even now as an adult, it makes me crazy when movies, TV show use this sort of plot device. It was so frustrating. Just look at him. He's right. Or, crap, where'd he go? Me too. I watched in the 70s and would get so mad. Obviously he wasn't an imaginary friend, because I could see him too. I couldn't figure out how the adults always just missed seeing him. Snuffy had the worst timing. It's crazy how much thought has to go into these kids shows. I've heard stuff like this about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as well. You definitely have to be careful when you're basically talking directly into a developing brain. You definitely have to be careful when you're basically talking directly into a developing brain. Only if you're halfway decent. It's also a great opportunity to sell them things. That's true. YouTube Kids content proves that. I've seen the stuff that ends up on the YouTube Kids app when my nephew watches, and it's garbage. I thought YouTube Kid content was thinly veiled Pinot with popular Disney characters, and little girls dressing like strippers and whispering. I mean, those are the dark fringes of it. Yeah, most content is not like that, just kind of vapid and mind-numbing at worst. It hasn't been completely changed though. On Twitter, Mr.Snuffleupagus account only follows Big Bird, just like any good imaginary friend would do. Rip Big Bird. Today I learned it's Snuffleupagus and not Snuffleupagus. Is it still pronounced the same though? Not in my head. The first is more of a Snuffleupagus and the second would go Snuffleupagus, if that makes any sense. Today I learned he's not imaginary anymore. Not since 1985. Well, I'm pretty old, lol. In the article he is pictured with Justrolledintotheshop. That was so frustrating. The adult would turn to look, and a fountain or a bus would always block sight of Snuffy at just the right moment. What the article mentions, but the title doesn't, for those of you who don't read beyond that, is the concern was about children suffering from abuse thinking they wouldn't be believed if they went to an adult. Yeah, as a kid I absolutely hated how Big Bird was telling the truth, yet the adults wouldn't believe him. I found it incredibly frustrating. As a kid, I saw it as evidence that adults definitely did not know as much as they claimed, and that I was smarter than them. This attitude and its ramifications may have lasted well beyond my Sesame Street years, and might not always be a good thing. Snuffy was the best. Ha, we saw him the whole time. We were just freaking with you, Big Bird. I remember that happening when I was a kid. When my wife and I first started dating I was working 7 days a week. Her friends started calling me Snuffleupagus. My wife calls me Mr.Snuffleupagus. The episode where other people finally see Snuffleupagus was a watershed moment for me as a child. I remember feeling incredibly vindicated, so I think the producers hit their mark. It's not just that they wanted to avoid kids feeling like adults wouldn't believe them, it's that they didn't want kids saying what someone did around them and the parents didn't believe them. You don't want your kid thinking he can't tell you about some pedophile because he says he's a secret friend. I don't think I really watched Sesame Street as a kid, but I have 2 kids and grew to have a great appreciation of it as a parent. The history of it is really interesting. Oh my god, it was just so frustrating. I remember it being upsetting. Everyone thought Big Bird was either a liar or crazy, both of which seemed very unfair to little me. I remember that being a very frustrating, stress-inducing problem from my own very young childhood. Shouting at the TV and wanting everyone to know the truth. Okay, I'm a first-generation Sesame Street kid. They used to have a street hustler named Lefty wearing a trench coat who was always trying to sell Ernie stuff he had hidden in the coat. Hey you. See me. Nervously look around before opening his coat. Whispering, you wanna buy a Q? He was my favorite. I always loved his eyelashes. Ironically, this teaches kids that have seen both versions that it's okay to lie, because eventually it'll turn it into the truth. It took a long time to change it though. I remember watching it with my kid years later and being shocked that the adults were interacting with Snuffy. That it used to make me so mad when I was a kid. He's real, damn it. Or, he's not BB's imaginary friend anymore. I'm not sure how I feel about that. This is why they changed it. But the producers realized this storyline needed to change in the early 1980s when an alarming issue started hitting the news. A 60-minute series on child abuse made the showrunners think that it wouldn't be a good idea to continue a storyline where one of their main childlike characters wasn't believed by grown-ups. It does make a lot of sense. Snuffy was Big Bird's imaginary friend when I was a kid. Thank you. I knew I remembered that as a kid. I love that character. So cute. I remember this. I remember feeling betrayed when he was finally seen by adults. Instead of learning my parents will listen to me, I now have an irrational fear that show writers are all about to pull the rug out from under me. Obviously that happened after I stopped watching Sesame Street. I'm 44 and still adults don't listen to me. I was just explaining this the other night to my 10-year-old son. How Snuffleupagus was imaginary. I would get frustrated at Snuffy for being such an idiot and not sticking around when the adults arrived. I feel like between Mr. Hooper dying, 1983, and Snuffy finally being revealed to the adults, 1985, Sesame Street was keeping in real in the early 80s. Certainly 2 of my first television memories. And then Challenger a year later. It's Snuffleupagus and I will not be told otherwise. Row. Until this post I had no idea he was ever revealed to the adult characters. He was still Big Bird's imaginary friend when I saw it last. But isn't this teaching kids that adults will only believe them if the adults see it for themselves? They never actually believed Big Bird. They just learned they were wrong with additional evidence. If you really wanted kids to know that adults would believe them, shouldn't they have just believed Big Bird without seeing Mr. Snuffleupagus?